So, hello there, and welcome back to another Night of the Movies podcast. I'm Spike Knight, and in these podcasts, I love talking about things, movies and TV, and whatever I want, whenever I want. And in today's podcast, I'm talking all about the Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant dramedy, Extras. So, let's get into it, shall we? Extras was this dramedy solely, entirely written and directed by Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant, who also both starred in the show as well. And this show ran from 2005 to 2007. And it was Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant's follow-up to The Office, to the UK version of The Office, the original version of The Office. You know, I still think that the UK version of The Office, the original version of The Office, is the superior version of The Office. Many people might disagree, and they'll say the US version of The Office and they say the US version of The Office is better. And I understand where they're coming from, but personally, I think the UK version is more realistic and therefore funnier. So yeah, Extras was their follow-up to the UK version of The Office. And the UK version of The Office is still talked about all the time today. Whenever you see Ricky Gervais or Stephen Merchant in an interview today, even though they haven't worked together for a long period of time, over 10 years now, whenever you see them in an interview separately, they're always asked about The Office in some kind of way, or The Office is brought up, you know what I mean? So it's still talked about today, and it was talked about a lot when it came out, over 20 years ago, over 20 years ago now, you know, that's when the original version of The Office came out, over 20 years ago, which is kind of crazy to say. When it came out, a lot of people were talking about it. I mean, not straight away, but it grew this fan base pretty quickly, and it got to the point that people loved it, and it won BAFTAs, and it won Golden Globes, which is kind of unheard of for a comedy like that. And The Office became this huge thing. The original version of The Office became this huge thing to the point that it spawned different versions. It spawned a US version. I think not too long ago there was an Australian version of The Office, and I think later this year we're going to get a sequel to the US version of The Office. So essentially that's going to be like a spin-off of a spin-off of a spin-off, if you know what I mean. So yeah, you had all these different versions of The Office that spawned because of the original UK version of The Office, because of how revolutionary, and I mean, it was really revolutionary, how revolutionary that original UK version of The Office was, how it changed the look of comedy, how well it was directed, how people actually thought that it was a documentary, how sharply and perfectly it was written, how it, perfected the whole art of cringe comedy. It changed the face of UK comedy. And in a way, it changed the face of comedy as well, because we had the US version of The Office, which became huge in America that followed this. Yes, the UK version of The Office, you get the point I'm making, was very big and still continues to be talked about to today. It still has this huge cult following. And after The Office ended with a perfect, and I mean perfect, Christmas special, one of the best Christmas specials of any TV show ever, in I want to say Christmas of 2003, there was a lot of talk, at least this is what I gathered after doing some research online. I haven't done loads of research, by the way, but after doing a little bit of research online, I gathered that there was a lot of speculation around what Ricky Gervais and Steve Merchant's follow-up to The Office was going to be, because the two were still quote-unquote working together on the Ricky Gervais XFM show, which Ricky Gervais hosted alongside Stephen Merchant and Carl Pilkington. And I did quote-unquote there because if you've actually listened to the Ricky Gervais XFM show, and this is a sign out here, but, bear with me because it is important. If you've actually listened to the Ricky Gervais XFM show, which I do daily, honestly, whenever I'm in a bad mood, I stick on the Ricky Gervais XFM show. This morning, I woke up in a bit of a bad mood, in a bit of a bad way, and I stuck on the Ricky Gervais XFM show, and I was laughing myself silly, and I've listened to the Ricky Gervais podcast, whether it's the XFM podcast or the Ricky Gervais podcast itself, which he did as a follow-up to the XFM shows after they left XFM in 2005. Whenever I listen to any of the Ricky Gervais podcasts, which you can still get on YouTube or on Spotify, I am smiling and laughing myself silly. They just brighten up my day. And yeah, even though I've listened to them about like a billion times, and that's no exaggeration, I still find them absolutely hilarious. And they were doing the Ricky Gervais XFM show between the Office and Extras, so they were still working together. Ricky Gervais and Steve Merchant were quote unquote still working together. They weren't really working. It wasn't really work what they were doing. If you listen to the podcasts, it's more just like three guys in a pub. It's more just like you're hearing conversations between Ricky Gervais, Steve Merchant, and Carl Pilkington in a pub. That's what it generally sounds like. Three mates in a pub, but you know, it still was classed as work, and they were getting paid for it, so there you go. It was a job. Yeah, they were still working together between The Office and Extras. And because they were still working together on XFM, there was all this speculation, at least from what I gathered, and again, I don't know this for certain. I wasn't around when, well, I was around actually, but I wasn't really interested in this sort of stuff when it was happening. There was a lot of speculation surrounding what Ricky Gervais and Steve Merchant's follow-up to The Office was going to be. And then in 2005, this little show came along. Extras came along. And if you don't know what Extras is about, essentially it follows a character called Andy Millman, played by Ricky Gervais, and his best friend Maggie, played by Ashley Jensen, both of which have worked together quite a few times since working together in this show. And Andy and Maggie, you follow them in the show as they're extras on all these different film and TV sets, and as they try and get their big break. But in doing so, they also get into these embarrassing and hilariously cringy situations with prolific stars, with prolific guest stars. There's so many guest stars in Extras, like so many. To name a few, you have the likes of Ben Stiller in there, who later went to go and work with Gervais in the Night at the Museum movies, because Gervais plays the manager in those films. You also have Oscar winner, I'm pretty sure she was an Oscar winner by this point. You have Oscar winner Kate Winslet in this show at one point. Samuel Jackson's in this show. Orlando Bloom is in this series. Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen are in this series. Daniel Radcliffe is in this series, and he was still Harry Potter at the time that he had this guest appearance in this show. You have Warwick Davis, who is just perfect in this show as well. Ronnie Corbett is in this series, alongside musical guest stars such as Chris Martin, the lead singer of Coldplay. George Michael is in this show at one point, and as is David Bowie in one of the best scenes in any comedy period, doing this song, which I'm not going to spoil, but it's absolutely, it's just comedic brilliance. And on top of all that, on top of the main storyline centered around Ricky Gervais and Ashley Jensen's characters Andy and Maggie, and on top of all the guest stars, you also have this storyline in the show going on with Andy and his agent called Darren, played by Stephen Merchant in the show. And Darren is like the worst agent imaginable, and his best friend is Sean Williamson, which many people might know as Barry from EastEnders, and they keep playing into the fact that he apparently just left EastEnders when he came to do this show. And yeah, you have that going as well. So you have another character in there with Barry too. There's a lot of characters in this show, but at the same time it doesn't really feel like there is. And everything's just balanced so perfectly. And the thing is, the addition of Steve Merchant in this show, because he wasn't in The Office, he wasn't really in The Office, he had a small appearance in one of the episodes of the original version of The Office, but he wasn't really in that show, and the addition of him in Extras is comedic genius. It's comedy genius. It truly is. I mean, there's so many elements of this show which are comedy genius. And the thing is, Extras still holds up. It is still absolutely fantastic today. It's not a show which has aged badly, really, at all. It's not one of the comedies which you can watch now and go, okay, this isn't great. Like, I've been watching Friends a little bit recently. I don't really know why, because I've never been the biggest fan of Friends, but I just saw it on Netflix one day and decided to give it a go again. And I have seen it all the way through, by the way, but I decided to maybe see if it's held up particularly well, and it hasn't. There are a lot of parts of Friends which have not held up well, but that's another topic for another day. But the point I'm making is, there are plenty of comedies out there which haven't held up well. Even over the past 10 years, like, I don't think The Big Bang Theory has held up well. But Extras came out, well, yeah, it started 20 years ago now. I follow Stephen Merchant on Instagram, and he posted something about the fact that it's been 20 years since Extras started a couple of weeks ago. And the thing is, it is still held up, it is still relevant today, and it is still funny as well. I mean, it's not for everybody. If you're not a fan of The Office, the chances are you're not going to be a fan of this show either. But the cringe comedy in this series is, yet again, absolutely perfect. Like, Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant mastered cringe comedy in The Office. They did it to perfection, and they did it again here to perfection as well. But somehow they did it in a different format, and that sounds like it's easy to do, but it's really not. You know, The Office has done this sort of mockumentary style. Like, you actually believe you're watching real people in an office, whilst you don't have that sort of mockumentary style in the filmmaking of this show. And the comedy is done differently. It's done in a different kind of format. It's done with some high-profile actors, like what he mentioned, Ben Stiller, Samuel Jackson, Ian McKellen, Patrick Stewart, David Bowie. You know, these people who were huge in their own right. Yeah, the people who were huge in their own ways. And you have them coming into the show, and sometimes when you have guest stars coming to the show, it doesn't always work. It feels like the guest stars kind of overshadow it, and you can't get past the fact you're watching a guest star on the show. But that's kind of the genius, but it isn't kind of the genius, actually. It is the genius of Extras. It leans into the fact that you are watching these guest stars, and at the same time, it completely embarrasses and satirizes these guest stars at the same time. Like, Orlando Bloom, as what he mentioned earlier on this podcast, just came off Pirates of the Caribbean, and actually, I think he was still filming the Pirates of the Caribbean sequels, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, he just come off the first Pirates of the Caribbean and the Lord of the Rings trilogy with his appearance in this show. And he was quite brave for doing this. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of Orlando Bloom. I got a picture of him once, and I'm happy that I did, but I'm still not the biggest fan of Orlando Bloom nonetheless. However, when he came in this show, what he does in this show does make me like him more, because he plays this caricature, I can never pronounce that word correctly, I think I did though, caricature of himself, where he's going on about how, on the set of Pirates of the Caribbean, all the girls just run up to me, they see Johnny Depp and go, oh, who's that? Who's Johnny Depp? And they come up to me, and they're all over me, all the girls want to be with me, and it's brilliant. Nowadays, I don't think, well, even back then as well, you probably wouldn't have many actors or many famous people at that who would be willing to play into that sort of role. You know how you have Ben Stiller in the very first episode of this series playing this filmmaker playing this director, playing himself. He's playing himself, he's not playing a character, but he's playing himself as this director, because Ben Stiller is also a filmmaker as well. He's playing himself as a director who is constantly mean to everybody. And again, not many people will be willing to do that. Not many people will be willing to make themselves look bad for the sake of a BBC comedy, dramedy, whatever you want to call it. But Ben Stiller does that in this show, and it makes me respect all the guest stars in a new light in this show, because again, they're not really playing themselves. I mean, they are playing themselves, but they're playing comedically exaggerated versions of themselves. Like when Patrick Stewart is in this show, he's basically playing a perverted version of himself, and it sounds like it shouldn't work, but it's comedic brilliant. It's comedy genius. It really is. And the comedy in the show is so well done, but also so is the drama in this show. This is a great dramedy. If you don't know what that word is, I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory. Essentially, it's a comedy and a drama mixed together. You know, in many ways, The Office is a dramedy, and so is this. So is Ricky Gervais and Steve Merchant's follow-up to The Office in this show. It's a dramedy, and the thing is about the best comedies, and I've still maintained this. I spoke about this in regards to Frasier, which I did a whole podcast on about a month ago now, if I'm not mistaken. In my opinion, the best comedies have to have drama in there. They have to get serious at some point. You have to have these laugh-out-loud moments in the best comedies, but you also have to have these moments where you really feel like your heart's been ripped out of your body. And this show does that very well. Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant do that well, because at one moment you'll be laughing out loud and you will be dying of laughter. But then before you know it, you will also feel completely heartbroken. You know, they did that in The Office so well, and they do that in this show so well as well. The drama in this show, the character relationships, may be played for comedy at some point. I mean, actually, throughout most of the show, the character relationships are played for comedic purposes. But they are also played for the drama, and they also add another layer of the show which makes you keep watching it, which makes you want to return to it time and time again. And that's the thing, every other year, and I don't do this intentionally, but every other year I find myself returning to watch this show on BBC iPlayer. And again, I don't do that intentionally. I don't think, well, in about 2 years' time I'll watch this show again. No, I don't think that. Honestly, I'll just be thinking of a show to watch, and sometimes, like, once every other year, as I've just said, I will find extras on BBC iPlayer, and before I know it, I watched 4 episodes and I'm dying of laughter. You know, I didn't plan on doing a podcast on extras this year. I didn't plan on rewatching it this year. But it was a couple of weeks ago now, and I was like, you know what, I haven't seen extras in a bit. Let's watch a couple episodes which remind me of how good it was. The surprising thing is, I think it just gets better with age. And I don't necessarily mean like it's held up well, because I do think it has held up well. But also I mean like, the older you get and the more you learn about the entertainment industry, I think the better this show gets. Because I first watched this show, it might have been like 10 years ago now, actually. I was too young to watch the show when I first did, but still, I think it was about 10 years ago when I first watched the show. It might have been a bit less than that, maybe like 7 or 8 years ago. But anyway, when I first watched the show, I found it very funny. I did. But I didn't quite get it all. And the more I watch this show, the more it grows on me. The more I get it, the more I go, oh, yeah, this is actually far smarter and far more perceptive and far funny than I ever gave it than I ever give it credit for back when I first watched it. You know, now I'm somebody, I've got my own YouTube channel. I talk about movies and TV shows on YouTube all the time, and often get ridiculed for, and often get people shout at me in the comment sections of my videos because of my thoughts on films and TV shows. But nevertheless, you know, because I do this YouTube channel now, I often look into trivia surrounding a movie, look into the behind the scenes stuff surrounding a film, listen to film pundits online talk about their experience on film sets that they've been on in the past. And because, you know, I've become more interested in the behind-the-scenes stuff centered around the film industry, because I watch more behind-the-scenes documentaries on films, and because I've watched people talk about their time on film sets, whether it's film pundits who've been on film sets, extras who've been on film sets, or actors who've been on film sets. It's made me see extras in a new light. I am now watching the show and going, oh my god, this sounds incredibly accurate to what it's actually like on a film set. I don't know if it is accurate. I've personally never been on a film set. I'd love to, by the way. If someone wants to invite me, please go ahead. But I've never been on a film set myself. But yet, at the same time, I've heard lots of stories about people who've been on film sets, whether on podcasts or interviews and whatnot, you name it. And when I'm watching the show, it's like, oh my god, I can believe this is the case. I can totally believe that this is the way film sets or TV sets function. And I think that's what this show gets so right. It is so believable. You totally buy into everything. The same way you did with The Office. You buy into it all over again. And I think a lot of that is down to the directing, which is from Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant themselves. You know, not only did they write every single episode of this show, but they also directed every single episode of this show. And I don't think they get enough credit for that. I don't think they get enough credit as directors, because they really came... They really elevated themselves as directors when they worked on this show. I mean, they established themselves as interesting filmmakers and as interesting directors with The Office and their directing style when it came to that show, you know, emulating so many documentaries and the documentary style when it came to that show and everything like that. But when it comes to this show, what I think they do so well is making it believable, making it believe they're actually watching people function on a film set. They're actually watching a film production happen, because most episodes, not every episode, but most episodes start off with the fictional film that everybody on this fictional film set is making. You actually get to see it being shot, and you just like that in the opening seconds, or whenever you get to see the fictional film being shot, if you follow my thinking, you totally buy into the film because you are seeing it be shot. You know, I'm not sure how much I'm making sense there, but because of the way Stephen Merchant and Ricky Gervais make the show, because of their direction, you totally buy into everything. And it's also because of their writing. But Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant have had lots of credit for writing in the past, loads of credit. They've been credited to death with their writing, both being called excellent comedy writers in their own right, whether when they work together or whether when they work separately. They've been praised for their writing a lot in the past, but I also think they haven't been praised enough for their directing, and I really think that comes across in this show in particular. They understand how to make everything like a film set. They understand how to make everything, you know, that they're trying to convince you that you're watching a film. They understand how to make you think like you're watching a film at the start of every episode, but they also make you feel uncomfortable, and they make the comedy work brilliantly. And people think it's easy to make a comedy when it's really not. How many bad comedies do you see out there? You see far more bad comedy movies and far more bad comedy TV shows than good comedy movies and good comedy TV shows. And the simple reality is, it's hard to do good comedy. It's hard to direct comedy. Again, people think it's easy. People think you can just slip into comedy. But actually, I think comedy is one of the most difficult genres to get right. And when you get it right, it can be sensational. It can be, you know, amazing. It can be something which is looked back on in such a high regard. But it's so difficult to get comedy right. And again, people don't think it is, but it is. And Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant get the comedy in this show perfect. Like I've already said in this review, they are the masters of cringe comedy. They know how to do cringe comedy so perfectly. And again, not many people know how to do that. They know how to direct comedy. They know how to do comedic timing so well. Like in the scenes between Ricky Gervais and Steve Merchant in the show, you are laughing out loud. And you aren't just laughing out loud because they're two very funny people in themselves. You're also laughing out loud because of the writing, the comedic timing, and the way everything's directed in those scenes. And you're also laughing in the scenes with the guest stars, again, not just because of the writing, but the writing is fantastic, by the way. But not just because of the writing, but also because of the way everything is being staged and directed. The comedy in this show is underrated on another level, in my opinion. I don't think enough people really appreciate how well the comedy in this show is done, how well it is executed, how well it's brought to life. Because it's not an easy thing to do, to bring a comedy like this to life, to bring a comedy about extras on a film set to life, to have these guest stars come in and play caricatures of themselves. But the filmmakers, the people behind the show, and in particular Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant, do that effortlessly. And I do think it helps that you have them two in the show as well, in two leading roles, particularly Gervais, who was a lead on the show and is completely different than his lead role in the original version of The Office, in which he played David Brent. You know, he became this huge sort of sensation as David Brent. From what I've heard, people absolutely loved the character David Brent to the point that he had his own movie in 2016, which wasn't that good. But still, actually, I didn't mind the David Brent movie, but it wasn't nearly as good as it should have been. But anyway, people absolutely loved the character David Brent, and it would have been so easy for Ricky Gervais on the show just to come in and go, oh yeah, I'm going to do the David Brent thing all over again. But he didn't. He did something completely different in his role. And again, he sort of plays into a caricature of himself. Because this show is loosely based, and I say loosely, and I do really mean it, but it is very loosely based, nonetheless, on Rick Gervais's life. You know, in the show, he writes a comedy about a boss that he had back in the day, and that is literally what he wrote The Office about back in the day as well. He wrote The Office about a boss he had back when he used to work in an office. And in this show, he writes a sitcom that he's trying to get off the ground, that he's trying to make happen about his former boss. And so you have those similarities to Gervais's own personal life. And it's not just that, but there are other similarities in the show as well. But you have many similarities like that to Gervais's personal life, and even Merchant's personal life at that, throughout this show, which also make it that bit more engaging to watch, particularly if you know Rick Gervais's work outside of this show. If you followed him as a person, or if you've listened to the Rick Gervais podcast, as I've done a lot in the past. And that's another thing about this show. You know, the Rick Gervais podcast, the Rick Gervais XFM podcast, which, like I said before, you can still get on YouTube and on Spotify. The Rick Gervais XFM podcast, which he did alongside Stephen Merchant and Carl Pilkington, which is comedic genius in itself, an unintentional comedic genius, because they didn't plan any of those shows. If you actually listen to the XFM shows that they didn't plan any of them, and yet each one of them is absolutely hilarious in their own way. The Rick Gervais XFM show that Rick Gervais did along Steve Merchant and Carl Pilkington, there's a lot of that show in the writing of this series. A lot of that radio show in the writing of this series. And I think that's what makes it, particularly as somebody who's a big admirer of the Rick Gervais podcast, who listens to it daily, that's also another reason I enjoy this show so much. You know, there's a lot of moments in the Rick Gervais podcast and the Rick Gervais XFM podcast where Ricky Gervais is asking Carl Pilkington, oh, what would you rather be? Would you rather be this, or would you rather be that? And that's one of the main sort of recurring things between our main two characters in this show, between Rick Gervais' character and Ashley Jensen's characters in this show. Ashley Jensen's character keeps asking Rick Gervais' character, what would you rather be, this or that? And that's the thing which I think stemmed from the Rick Gervais X-Fan podcast, which he did before doing this show. And a lot of the same sort of comedy that you get in the show, you also got on the Rick Gervais XFM podcast, and so my love of this show from like 7 years ago made me also love, from when I first watched the show about 7 years ago, made me also love the Rick Gervais XFM podcast when I first got into it about 4 or 5 years ago now. And one last thing that connects this show to the Rick Gervais XFM podcast, the Rick Gervais XFM show that he did back in the day, the Rick Gervais XFM radio show that he did back in the day, is that Carl Pilkington, who Rick Gervais and Steve Merchant became friends with on the Rick Gervais XFM show, does have a very brief cameo in the final episode of this show as well, which brought a smile to my face. I really wish those three would do something together again. I really wish Ricky Gervais, Stephen Merchant and Carl Pilkington would do something together again. Because when they do stuff together, it is brilliant. And people say Stephen Merchant is like the weak link of those three. But I completely disagree. If you take any of them out, it's just not the same. You know, I watch stuff with Rick Gervais and Carl Pilkington, and it's funny, but it's not nearly as funny as when Stephen Merchant's there as well. Stephen Merchant knows how to stir the pot in a sort of comedic way, and he does so in a way which brings out the best in Gervais, Merchant and Pilkington. So I would really love them three to do something together again. Just another episode of their podcast all these years later, because it still has this cult following. I don't know if people know this, but the Rick Gervais podcast gets something like 20,000 listens on Spotify per day, and I'm one of those 20,000 listeners. Yeah, people still listen to that podcast. People still listen to their radio shows that he did back in the day on Spotify and on YouTube, and it still has that cult following. And I feel like they could do something together again. I don't know if they ever will, but I would personally love that because they really bring out the best in each other. But that's a bit of a tangent there that I've just gone on. I wanted to talk more about extras, more about this show. Yes, every episode of this show has a moment where I'm dying of laughter. This is a sort of comedy which I absolutely love, and I'm hard to make laugh. I'm one of those people where, I can be sad in the cinema watching a comedy movie or sat at home watching an episode of a comedy TV show and I just don't get it. A lot of people say Fawlty Towers is one of the best comedy TV shows ever. Never got it myself. People love Dad's Army. Not for me. But Extras is a sort of comedy I like. And I don't know what that says about me, but it is a sort of comedy that I just latch onto and cannot stop laughing at. Whenever I'm in a bad mood and I don't feel like listening to a podcast, I don't feel like listening to the Ricky Gervais Show, I will stick on a clip from Extras or stick on a clip from The Office and I'm dying of laughter. And it just makes me feel in a better mood just like that. Now, I will say that this show doesn't quite reach the height of the UK version of The Office, of the original version of The Office. It's not quite as good as The Office. How many times am I going to say Office in the space of 10 seconds? But yeah, it's not quite as good as The Office. I feel like the last 2 episodes of the show, although not bad at all, and it's still very, very good, they're just not the last 2 episodes of The Office. Like the last good couple episodes of the UK version of The Office are perfect and absolutely hilarious and a gut-wrenching at the same time, and it's just, perfect as I've already said. But I wouldn't necessarily say the end of Extras is perfect. It's very, very good. The last episode is, it's very, very good, but it's also very different than the rest of the series. The last episode of Extras kind of feels like a movie, and that was the thing. I wonder if Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant also, almost by the time they came around to making the last episode of Extras, kind of wanted to make a movie and already kind of moved on in their writing into the sort of movie format, because the next thing they did was Cemetery Junction, which is a wonderful, lovely film, by the way. Yeah, that was the next thing they did after doing this show. And so I wonder if they wanted to move into the film format after, and I think you can kind of tell that with the last episode. Again, it's a good last episode. It's a very good last episode. I just don't think it's the best episode of this show overall. And I think the last episode, the UK version of The Office, is one of the best episodes of that show. One of the best episodes of any comedy series, period. So yeah, the last episode doesn't quite reach the heights you wanted to. And there are some parts of this series which I feel aren't as funny as they could be. There's one episode where Stephen Merchant's character goes on a date with Anthony Jensen's character and he's got poo on his forehead, and I personally don't like poo and weed jokes, so that episode is not one I particularly like to return to. And there are other episodes which don't quite make you laugh out loud the way you want them to. And I'm not saying that all this show works 100%. I'm not saying that. But boy, does it work when it works. And it works so well as this satirical take on the entertainment industry. And the thing is, nowadays, particularly after The Studio came out earlier this year, many people might say that the AppleTV Plus Seth Rogen-led TV show, The Studio, is better than this show as a sort of satirical take on the entertainment industry. And the thing is about The Studio, I like it quite a bit. I think it's really good. And the first 4 episodes of The Studio, I thought were some of the best episodes of any comedy that I've seen over the past couple of years. However, I do feel it's slightly overrated. The second half of The Studio, I did not feel was nearly as well written as the first half, and it wasn't nearly as funny. It still had some really funny moments, but I don't feel The Studio is quite as perceptive and is quite as satirical and is quite as funny as Extras. Extras does such a better job, in my opinion, of showing this satirical take at the film and television industry, whilst the studio is more about Hollywood and it's more about Seth Rogen coming up with like, okay, it more feels like Seth Rogen coming up with ideas like, okay, what would it be if we did this sort of sketch in a format of a sort of Hollywood setting, you know? Whilst Extras isn't like that. The sort of Hollywoodness, the entertainment industry aspect of Extras is built into the show, whilst it feels like, in the case of the studio, the show was built around the fact that it wanted to be this comedy centered around Hollywood. And again, I like the studio, I'm not dissing it, I thought it was really funny, but I just didn't think it was nearly as good as Extras. Like, when I was watching the studio on Apple TV Plus earlier this year, I was watching it thinking, oh, this isn't as good as Extras. It isn't quite as sharp on the comedy or quite as laugh out loud funny. Like, there were a couple parts of the studio where I was dying of laughter. There were a couple parts in every episode of Extras where I'm dying of laughter. And I wished that I got that from the studio. Still, I like the studio, but there's a lot of people nowadays are going to say, well, the studio is a better sort of satirical look at the entertainment industry. And I'm like, I don't necessarily agree. They are different shows, but if someone was to ask me which is the better satirical take on the entertainment industry, I would easily say Extras. I think Extras is still comedy genius. Still comedy genius. They get the cringe comedy in the show perfect. And they have guest stars in the show doing things that you just don't expect guest stars on the level of the guest stars that they have doing. You have Kate Winslet in the show, who I said it on this review, who I think had won an Oscar by the time she made an appearance in the show. You have her saying at one point in the episode that she appears in, if you play a mentor, you are guaranteed an Oscar. You don't expect anybody like Kate Winslet to say that. At one point, you have Warwick Davies, who went on to go and work with Gervais and Merchant on the TV show Life's Too Short a couple of years after this. You have Warwick Davies in one episode of the show fighting Gervais, and Gervais knocks him on the ground and Warwick Davies goes unconscious. And it's so funny, you just don't expect someone like Warwick Davies to do that, but it works perfectly. We have Daniel Radcliffe trying to pull every older woman he sees in the episode he makes a guest role in. And again, he was playing Harry Potter at the time that he was cameoing, that he was guest starring in the show, and that shouldn't work. And not many actors would do that, particularly someone who's playing Harry Potter, but it works so well. And I mean, I could go on and on and on. You have David Bowie in the show, who I mean, I've never been a big David Bowie fan, in all honesty. I think some of his music's great, but I just never really got into his music overall. There's some of his songs I love, but yeah, it's just, I've never really been the biggest Bowie fan, it's a point I'm making. But his appearance in the show made me love him so much more, and it's just guest star after guest star after guest star. Satirizing, I can't pronounce that flipping word. Satirizing? Is it satirizing? I think it's satirizing. I've been going on for that long, I've kind of forgotten how to speak today. I don't know what is going on with me. It's satirizing, isn't it? Satirizing. Yeah, it's satirizing. I don't know why I was thinking I was wrong. It's satirizing themselves in just perfect ways, which makes for, the best comedy. I'm not saying this is the best comedy of all time. I'm not saying that. But it is one of my favourite comedies. It's a comedy that I return to time and time again. And I don't expect to return to time and time again, but I just end up returning to nevertheless. It is still so funny, and still so well written, and still absolutely brilliant. It is one of the best comedies and one of the best dramedies at that I have ever seen. And I just absolutely love it. I can't quite get over that it exists, and I can't quite get over the guest stars that they had in the show. But the fact is they did, and they all just worked wonders. Yeah. I still think Extras holds up, and I still love it to pieces. And so, all in all, if I was to give Extras a rating, it would easily be a 10 out of 10. I mean, I have my problems with this show, but honestly, for what it is, it just worked. And it works so, like, it works like 100%. I don't think it works 100% overall, but for what it is, it's working 100%, if you follow what I'm saying. And as somebody who is such a fan of Rick Gervais and Steve Merchant, I have really grown in loving this show after I've learned a lot more about them as comedy writers and heard them on the Rick Gervais XFM podcast radio show they did back in the day. I really grown to like them a lot more because of their work outside of the show and because of their work with this show as well. And again, as I've said previously in this podcast today, it's such a well-written show with cringe comedy done to perfection, with comedy itself that is so well staged and still is funny now, and with this sense of believability and with guest stars that you don't expect to be doing the things that they do in this show, but that they do so brilliant. All the episodes of this show are brilliant. Some are better than others, but you get that with any TV show. All the episodes of this TV show are insanely funny, and they still hold up now. And one last thing, all the comedy in the show, well, not all of the comedy, most of the comedy in this show is not PC. It's not politically correct. And there'll be people who go, oh, you can never make Extras today. Like, there are people who say you can never make The Office today. Well, I think they're going to be proven wrong in a couple of months with The Office sequel series, which are coming out. But there are going to be people, the point of making it, it's going to be people now saying you can never make Extras today. First of all, the studio proves that you can. Yeah, the Apple TV Plus TV show, the studio proves that you can make Extras today, just in a different format. And also, Extras proves that you can do comedy that is not politically correct and still be funny and not offend anybody, or maybe not offend the masses. You know, people say you can't do comedy nowadays because everybody's too sensitive, because they're all too PC and everything like that. I'm like, no, people just don't know how to do comedy today like they did back in the day. That's my opinion. People just don't know how to do comedy like Extras. People don't know how to do comedy like The Office in the same way, to the same brilliance. And that's another reason I want Rick Gervais and Steve Merchant to reunite, because I want them to do another show which proves that you can still do great comedy today. And Extras, I think, works just as well today as it did 20 years ago when it first started airing. I love Extras. It's only like 13 episodes long, and I personally think it's one of the best comedies ever. It's one of my favourite comedies. I'm not saying it is my favourite, but it's one of my favourite. Yeah. I love it to pieces, and it is still comedy genius. Particularly as somebody who loves movies and loves TV shows. Particularly as somebody who loves learning about behind the scenes stuff on TV shows and on films. I just love this show to pieces. Absolutely love it. Comedy genius, as I've already said. And so, all in all, as I've already said, as well, and I'm going to say one more time in this podcast today, Extras is a 10 out of 10 from me. Anyway, guys, that's it for today's podcast. If you have seen Extras, please let me know your thoughts on it in the comment section below. And as always, thanks for watching or listening to this podcast. And if you haven't yet, please do click down below and like and subscribe on this video. And look forward to many more videos and many more podcasts coming very, very soon on this channel. I don't know what I'm doing with my hands right now. As I've already said, thank you as always for watching or listening to this podcast. And I will see you guys again soon. But bye for now. Bye.